Lifespan development. Today under this we are going to deal with the topic adolescent development theories. The objective of this lesson is to understand the developmental theories related to adolescence, to understand how cognitive development theory of adolescence takes place, to understand the moral development theory, and to understand the identity versus identity confusion in adolescence. The scientific approach for understanding the adolescence from different theoretical perspective or from different points of view. As a result of this, there are many theories for adolescent development. However, each theoretical perspective is based on a particular assumption to explain the adolescent development. No one single theoretical perspective covers all aspects of adolescence. By examining particular contribution from several theoretical perspectives, one may be able to arrive at a more comprehensive and well understanding of this adolescence. Let us now first consider the first theory of adolescence, that is the biological maturational theory. Assuming that adolescence begins with biological changes accompanying the puberty, it is from this assumption the earlier views of adolescence assumed as a direct link between the biological factors and psychological development. This perspective was pioneered by G. Stanley Hall. Hall's theory is probably the earliest formal theory of adolescence. As such, he is called as the father of scientific study of adolescence. Influenced by the Darwin's evolutionary theory, Hall argued that each person's psychological development recapitulates both biological and cultural evaluation of human species. The notion that ontogeny means the individual development, is brief and rapid recapitulation of phylogeny, that is the evolutionary development of human race. In essence, ontogeny reflects the development of the childhood through adolescence to adulthood. On the other hand, phylogeny reflects the evolution of man from early man through a traditional primitive man to the modern man. Hall saw adolescence as a time of storm and stress. According to Hall, the adolescent period of storm and stress is full of contradictions and wide swings in mood and emotions. The thoughts, feelings, and actions oscillate between the humility and conceit, goodness and temptations, and from happiness to sadness. One moment the adolescent may be nasty to the pair, and the next moment he might be nice to her. At one time he wants to be left alone, but shortly after some time the desire to cling to somebody occurs. In sum, Stanley Hall views adolescence as a turbulent time charged with conflict, a perspective which he labels it as stress and storm view of adolescence. Hall's analysis of adolescence years also led him to believe that the time to begin strenuously educating such faculties as civility, scientific thinking, morality at the age of 15 years. However, Hall's developmental vision of education is rested mainly on highly speculative theory rather than the empirical data. It was he who began theorizing the systematic and questioning that went beyond mere speculation and philosophy. The concept of adolescence as a period of storm and stress, however, raises several questions. That is, firstly, the adolescence is particularly stressful or conspicuously more so than any other periods. The second question is, if it were to concede that adolescence is stressful, then how stressful is it? And the third question is such stress attributable because of the physical changes that occurs or because of the society's failures to adopt the adolescent needs? And finally, what special measures, if any, should be taken to prevent or alleviate such stress the adolescent is experiencing? So, this is about the Hall's theory of adolescence. Jessel advocates that adolescence as a period characterized by negativism, introversion, rebellion. Another important theorist Anna Freud advocates that adolescence is typified by psychological disequilibrium resulting from sexual maturity and arousal of ego defense mechanism, that is the intellectualism. She also viewed adolescence as a state of flux, alternating between the periods of high enthusiasm and utter despair, between altruism and self-centeredness. Despite the significance that Hall views on the study of adolescence had, yet there are many other ideas not stood to test time, and all the writers do not agree that adolescence as a period of storm and stress. The social learning theory consists of rather diverse thoughts that range from Hull's drive reduction theory to Skinner's reinforcement theory to Freud's psychoanalytical theory. Social learning theory's effort in combining such a diverse point of view and has been described as merging of the clinically rich psychoanalytical concepts with scientifically rigorous behavior constructs. Clearly, social learning theory is a multidimensional, that it draws the concepts, hypotheses and methodology from variety of different psychological sources. While the social learning theory develops its own theoretical constructs, of which modeling and observing are most important, it draws freely on the constructs of behavior learning theory also. Skinner's concept of direct reinforcement is expanded to include the important social dimensions. Thus, the concerns of the social learning theory is those of the narrow connections between a stimulus and response. The bidirectional of the social influences, especially that of the children themselves being the active contributors to their own development, has undergone an influence of this social learning theory and became a core concept in ecological and contextual theories of development. Apart from incorporating the important models, the role of cognitive process, imitation of the models in the learning process, and adding the relationship of the individuals and social groups and the mutual influences are of unique importance in these theories. In short, the social learning theory is the whole spectrum of socialization process. These encompasses the imitation, modeling, instruction, reward and punishment by which the children learn and to which the children contribute, often through indirect teaching. The significance of socializing agents as a source of pattern of behavior has often been neglected in other theories. Even though observational and empirical evidences indicate that this aspect of learning process is fundamental to socialization and personality development. Bandura, a leading social learning theories, are pioneered the view that cognition, that is the act of knowing, bearing and environment, they play a primary role in human behavior. Bandura has observed that much of the adolescent behavior comes from observational learning, in which the adolescent observes and imitates the behavior of their parents, the other adults and peers. Furthermore, the adolescent learning and behavior are significantly affected by the cognitive variables such as competences, encoding strategies, expectancies, personal values, self-regulatory systems, that is a self-monitoring and motivation. Piaget's cognitive development theory and information processing are the two main cognitive theories. Piaget defines adolescence as a stage of transition from the use of concrete operations to the applications of formal operations in reasoning. This clearly distinguishes it from the puberty, which is the period in adolescence which is characterized by the physiological changes that end in childhood and bring the young person to adolescent size, shape and potential. Robert Havikhurst combines the individual's readiness for learning with certain social demands, defining the 8 developmental tasks of the adolescence. This is about the Environmental theories. Pioneered by Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, he regards childhood as the most formative period of the human development. In other words, he believed that the dynamics of personality depends largely on how the sexual instinct, that is the id, ego and superego, have been shaped during the formative years of the childhood. In the three-dimensional model of the mind, the id is a biological and is subconscious part of the mind, which is not aware, but which can influence one's behavior as a part of the personality. Or in other words, it upholds or represents the pleasure principle. It contains the irrational appetites and impulses. It emphasizes on the immediate gratification of needs. For example, hunger. Ego is a psychosocial, is a reality principle trying to endeavor to control the id to reality. The functions to adapt to the individual to reality, it delays, inhibits, restrains the control of id demands. The superego, which is social in nature, is the home of norms and ethical values of society, and it tries to bridge the gap between the id and ego. It represents the social moral component in the personality and represents the ideals rather than the real strive for perfection. The superego has two components, the consciousness and the ego ideal. The consciousness reacts to the moral transgression by the individuals through the feeling of guilt. The ego ideal produces pride and satisfaction if the individual's behavior is conforming to the acceptable standards. It is hypothesized that the weakening of the ego as a result of it and the subsequent inability of the superego to bridge the gap between the id and ego often has been cited as a major cause of psychological instability. The Freud's theoretical perspective emphasized that intensified sex drive resulting conflicts arose a lot of anxiety in adolescence. This anxiety in turn produces a variety of defense mechanisms such as the repression, intellectualization, asceticism for coping with the stress in adolescence. Central to Freud's psychoanalytical theory is the assumption that human beings have a powerful drive that must be satisfied. As a biological creatures, there is a drive in the individuals to satisfy or serve their motives. Yet, the society dictates that many of these urges are undesirable. Freud further added that the people are unaware of their biological instincts and the driving forces behind these behaviors. According to Piaget, around 11 years of the young age, people or the children enter this formal operational stage, in which they develop the capacity for abstract scientific thinking. Whereas the concrete operational children can operate on reality, the formal operational adolescents can operate on abstract things. In other words, they no longer require the concrete things or events as objects of thought. Instead, they can come up with a new, more general logical rules through internal reflections. We can see two types of stages in formal operational stage. Hypothetic deductive reasoning. At adolescence, the young people first become capable of hypothetic deductive reasoning. When faced with a problem, they start with a general theory of all possible factors that might affect the outcome and deduce from specific hypotheses about what might have happened. Then they test this hypothesis in an orderly fashion to see which one works in the real world. We can see a problem solving beginning with possibility and proceeds to reality. In contrast to the concrete operational children, they start with reality with the most obvious prediction about the situation. When these are not confirmed, they cannot think of other alternatives and fail to solve the problem. In contrast, a concrete operational child experiment unsystematically. They cannot separate the effects of each variable. They may test the effect of the string length without holding the weight constant and comparing. For example, a short light pendulum with a long heavy one. Also, a school child failed to notice that a variable that are not immediately suggested by the concrete material of the task, that is the height and the force at which the object can be released. So, this is the difference between a formal operational thought child and a concrete operational thought child. The next one is the propositional thought. Adolescents can evaluate the logic of the propositions without referring to the real world circumstances. In contrast, the children can evaluate the logical statements only by considering them at a concrete evidence in the real world.